Thanks for jumping on Giant TV. Really excited for my guest today, Renee Decker. She's an estate planning attorney and brought along her bearded dragon. You're going to love to see this creature. And most importantly, she's talking about the 6 common mistakes parents make when they're setting up planning for their kids. She pulls the curtain, great insight. Let's go jump in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Giant TV. Really excited to have you here and to have my guest, Renee Decker, here. Renee, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here today.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into this topic, because you're an estate planning attorney, and we're talking today about the 6 common mistakes parents make in planning for their kids, which is a really important topic in estate planning. But you have a friend with you. So I want to see if we can share that friend with you, because you and I were talking, you got a house full of animals. Who did you bring with us today?
Okay, so today I have Ash the bearded dragon. So let me just get
Ash the bearded dragon.
real quick.
It's like Puff the magic dragon comes to mind, but that's a different thing. Oh, there.
Yeah, this little guy.
Well, and you and I were talking, and those things live forever. I mean, 18 years is what they live.
Yeah, 18 years is about an average lifespan for one of these little guys. So he'll be with us for a long time, hopefully.
Yeah, your kids will be out of the house and you'll still be taking care of Ash.
So that might be another mistake I should add to the planning for minor children is to
Exactly.
get a pet that will outlive when they will move out of the house and go off to college. So.
Right, the seven common mistakes parents make. That's awesome. Love Ash. Love Ash. Oh, that's great. It's funny, but I've had the animals too at the house with the kids, but never the bearded dragons. Love it. Very cool looking thing. Well, awesome. All right. You want to put? Are we gonna get into it with Ash on your shoulder, or are you gonna put him away?
I'll even though he's pretty fond of climbing up there and sitting on my shoulder, but I'll stick this little guy back in his cage before we get started.
You might get a little excited over this topic today.
Yeah, he might.
Well, Renee, as you're putting the bearded dragon away, so you're in the Tampa Bay area. You're an estate planning attorney, and we're talking about the 6 common mistakes parents make. Let's jump into it. Let's start out. And what is the context of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so a little bit of the context is this is actually a topic that I'm pretty passionate about, having not really thought about a lot of this stuff until I had kids of my own, and then I actually had a friend who went through an experience where she was incapacitated, and her kids sort of had a really rough time because of that incapacity. And she actually thought a little bit about estate planning for her kids and had kind of set up some things that she thought would work for them. You know, she named a guardian in her will, somebody that she wanted to take care of her kids in the event that she passed away. But now she's incapacitated and that will isn't going to work anymore. So these topics I want to talk about today are just 6 common things that parents don't enter parents' mind when they're thinking about doing estate planning and setting up things for their kids to make sure that, you know, they'll be taken care of by the people that they'd want to take care of them in the event they're not able to do it.
Love it. Important stuff. Let's jump in. Okay, what's number 1?
Well, so before we get started with the 6, the obvious number 1 is not doing it at all, right? So if you don't do any planning for your children at all, sort of what happens to them is what the state's plan is, whatever state you live in, there's state laws that govern how that happens. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about that before, or, you know, as we're going through the 6 common mistakes, because that state's plan sort of jumps in to fill in the gaps for things that you may not have thought about. But obviously that's the number 1 biggest mistake is not doing it. And then second to that is not telling anybody that you've done it, because if something happens to you and you've done this pre-planning to take care of your kids, but nobody knows where to find that pre-planning, it's the same thing as not doing it at all, right? So
right.
That that's the two biggest concerns on the outset. And then once we get into the planning itself, one of the first major mistakes that I see parents make is not thinking about the right things when they consider who they want to take care of their kids. So there's a lot of different factors that go into that, right? And for example, one of the things I hear parents say all the time is, "Oh, well, I'd really like for this person to take care of my kids if I can't do it, but they don't have any money. So how would
Oh,
they
right,
take
right.
on the responsibility of raising, my two kids if they have three kids of their own and they're barely making ends meet?" And so that's not one of the things that we think about when we think about, nominating a guardian or someone to step in and take care of our kids
But how do
when
you
something happens to us.
how do you get around that? Because if those are the people that are loving and maybe you don't have many other choices and they don't have the money, I mean, are there ways for you to kind of take care of them, like maybe with an insurance policy or something where you provide money for your kids for them?
Absolutely. So that's one of the major considerations we have to look at, right? Is that we're looking for people who are going to provide the best environment for your kids. So that should be the first consideration. And the money part of it is actually, your responsibility as the parent. And so how do we do that? So we can do that through insurance policies, savings, but savings isn't an option for a lot of people. So then we got to look at the life insurance policies, right? And really make sure that we have everything set up there so that if something happens to you, those funds will be there, and we're not looking at the finance part of it when we're selecting who it is we want to
Okay.
raise your kids.
Okay.
Other things that people don't think about are, different ages. For example, my kids are 2 and 5. So
Yeah.
when I'm thinking about who I want to be their guardian, I'm thinking about who's going to provide the similar kind of experiences that I would want them to have, growing up with parents in the house. If you're thinking about, your 16-year-old kid, your 15-year-old kid, you might be thinking more about location. Who's going to step into where you live and take care of your kids there so they don't have to change high schools and friends and all of that towards the end of their school years.
Yeah, and then even when you talk about school, you want your kids to go to college. College is an expense, so that's another thing that probably comes into play with your discussion.
Absolutely.
What's the life my kids are going to have?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. What are some of the other top things that you see out there people are not doing right?
Sure. So then the second part is, once we've considered, what are the real things that are important to you as, you're the parent of your kids, about how your kids are going to grow up and who, so that affects who they're going to grow up with. The second part of that is not considering the circumstances of how you'd want those people that you've selected to raise your kids to raise them. So for example, let's say you're a dad and you have two kids and you love your brother and he's a great uncle and you think he'd be the best surrogate parent for you in the world, and she's anybody better. And he's married and you like his wife and you think she'd be a great mom to your kids too. But maybe you have another sibling that you would prefer to raise your kids in the event that something happened to your brother. So if brother and his wife are there, you'd want the two of them to raise your kids together. But if brother's not there, maybe you don't want sister-in-law to raise the kids by herself. Maybe you prefer other brother to be able to get to do that. So not
Oh, okay.
considering all the circumstances of, hey, these people would be great to raise my kids as a couple, but if one member of the couple can't do it, maybe it'd be better to have this other person raise my kids instead.
Yeah, or they get divorced. So you have something in there, the divorce, like okay, what happens here, in a divorce and all of a sudden he can't take care of him. I don't know. I mean, does that come into play?
Yeah, absolutely. You there's a lot of family dynamics, right, that
Yeah.
go along, or friendship dynamics that go along, depending on if you're looking outside of your family for who might be best to raise your kids. Um, and those dynamics are super important to, the experience that your kids will have with those people. So if there's a divorce and things maybe aren't as amicable as, you had thought they would be when you selected those two individuals to raise your kids, that's something that can certainly um, affect how you'd want that to happen. And also just thinking about, a lot of people want to name their parents who might be older. And so if mom and grandma and grandpa are both around, a court might be more likely to allow them to act as the guardian of the children. But what if grandpa has passed away and it's just grandma? Is that a responsibility that grandma can take on her own?
Got it. Yeah, very important things. Okay, what else are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so the third thing is you didn't name enough alternatives. And so sometimes I'll meet with people and they'll say, well, we really only have one person that we would want to name as guardian of our kids. And if that person can't do it, we don't really want to name anyone else. But one of the things you have to think about when you're trying to decide who to name as the person to raise your kids, if you can't do it for one reason or another, is the state's plan that's going to come into effect, right? And so here in Florida, that's the Department of Children and Families. So if we don't have anybody named as an alternate guardian, literally what will happen is the state will step in and they will pick the guardians of your children. And if you put it into perspective like that, people start to think, okay, well, maybe there is somebody better. Maybe there's a friend who I didn't initially feel comfortable reaching out to talk about this issue with, but thinking about, okay, some stranger that the state is going to pick or a judge is going to pick is going to raise my kid. It's important for me to reach out of my comfort zone a little bit and maybe talk to some other people that might be willing to do that for me.
Okay, very good, very insightful. Okay, are we on to number 4? Are we at 4 yet?
We're on to number 4. So the number 4 one, we're going to circle back around to the money, right? And so the money thing is one of the impediments to possibly talking about some of these people that you might want to listen to or you might want to list as alternatives, right?
Yeah.
Because it feels like you're saddling them with a huge financial responsibility. So you want to make sure that you've handled the money right so that you feel comfortable having that conversation with whoever it is you're asking to step in and raise your children. The second part of handling the money right, though, is saying, okay, how am I going to actually get this money to these children or to the people that are taking care of my children? And so it's the law in Florida, and it's this way, and I think in every state, just the details might be a little bit different, but minors can't inherit money. So you can't just leave a life insurance policy to a minor and have it go directly to them. So you want to think about, how is that going to work? In Florida, if we don't have some other planning involved in the process, what would have to happen is you'd have to have a guardian appointed. This is separate issue from having a guardian to take care of the person of the child, right? So separate than having brother or sister step in to raise the child. Now you need somebody to step in and be responsible for taking care of those finances. And if we haven't done a trust agreement for the life insurance that you want to leave your children, or any other type of inheritance that you would leave behind for your children, then we have to, file something with the court, petitioning the court to appoint a guardian. Obviously, there's a lot of expense involved with that. Obviously, that takes time to do, so the kids and the family don't have immediate access to those funds. So really important to think about having the proper mechanisms set up so that we don't have to go through that court process to have someone take care of those funds for the kids.
Yeah, because the court process could be ugly, long, expensive, and I've heard stories of the families breaking up over probate fights, and it's a public issue. So get it. All right, awesome. Number 5.
Yeah. Number 5 is kind of ties back into that court process a little bit, is that the parent didn't exclude challengers. So anybody who right off the top of your head might want to step in and say, hey, I want to raise these kids, but you, for whatever reason, wouldn't want them to. So that is one of the ways that I see these things draw out for a long period of time, is that brother and sister want to step in and do it. And even though if mom was around, she would have said, no way to sister, I don't want her doing it at all. Let brother do it. Mom's not there. And so now there's this big battle between brother and sister that's eating into the funds that you left for the kids, that's causing them emotional drama that could have been prevented had we, excluded those challengers from the get-go.
Yeah, well, that brings to mind when the musician Prince passed away without proper planning. He found out, his relatives, he never knew they existed, came out of the woodwork, you know, because it was a public issue and claiming this, that, and the other thing. So kind of hits home to your point.
Yeah, you just never know how it's going to roll out. And then if you do the responsible thing as a parent and you leave those financial assets, whether they be through savings or you have just insurance policies that you're leaving for your kids, sometimes that will cause people who might not otherwise want to be involved in the process to come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I think I would be that best person. And a judge is not in a great position to really understand
No.
why it is they might not be that person.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, great stuff. Okay. All right. I'm excited here. We're on number 6. This is unbelievable. What's the big number 6?
All right. The big number 6 is failing to take into consideration short-term guardians.
Okay.
So, if you talk to an estate planning attorney, you'll probably talk about naming long-term guardians in your will. But what about the short-term guardians? What happens if the person that you want to be the guardian of your children lives, 2 hours away, and the police show up at your house? This is just a scenario, but it's one that gets us thinking through what could happen, right? So you and your husband, your family, mom and dad have gone out for the evening, and they don't come home. So what does the babysitter do? Babysitter doesn't know who to call. So eventually, she might have to call the police to say, hey, I don't know where they are. They're not answering their cell phones. So what happens then? Let's say you've done everything right and you've named your long-term guardian. You've told the babysitter where the long-term guardian is. She knows exactly where to find it. The police get there and, you've contacted the long-term guardian, but long-term guardian is 2-3 hours away. Maybe long-term guardian lives on the West Coast and you live on the East Coast. What happens to your kids in that interim period? Well, what happens most of the time is that DCF gets involved, or whatever your Department of Families and Children is in your state, and your children are taken into temporary custody by a stranger for that period of time until the legal guardian can get there to get them. So as you can imagine, that's pretty traumatic for a child who might be wondering what is happening to mom and dad. And that's what happened with my friend that got me really thinking about all these issues and how I can, sort of educate parents in my community about naming these short-term guardians, someone that's close by that has the authority, the legal authority, that we've set it up properly so that the DCF or the police officers and first responders will accept that authority to say, hey, this person has the ability to stay with these kids and I don't have to get an outside stranger involved.
Renee, great stuff. I mean, I know this is such an important area, estate planning, because I think a stat I saw recently was 55 or 60% of Americans still don't have an estate plan in place. And I know of those that do, many of those are outdated. They're not done right. So just a reminder like this, especially with the kids, I think is critically important, because when life throws a curveball and the planning isn't done, you just see people get hurt emotionally, financially. So great stuff. I really love having you on here. I want to have you back. Keep updated on other hot topics. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate being here today.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, Renee, get connected to Renee. She's great, gives out a lot of education. You'll find her contact information wherever you're watching this show, because we're streaming everywhere. Thank you. We'll see you next time.